I received the title of top cop while working for our local police department. I was new to this department. All the other officers were old-timers and largely adhered to their customs. They were a great group of guys, and they all tried their best to help me settle in, but they all preferred to do things the old way. I used to take a couple of case files home with me and work on them in my free time. I was taking a criminology course offered at a state college 40 miles south of us. I used the new techniques I was learning to get back to those old things. As luck would have it, in my first 6 months of service, I solved 4 unsolved cases. It was a positive thing. The downside was that Stella spent 2 evenings a week away from me while I was in class, but she was a very caring wife. She knew that what I was learning now would pay off handsomely in the future. She was a nurse at our local hospital. She was able to rearrange her schedule to maximize our time together. We both came from middle-class families. We have already thought through everything about our future. We'll buy a house with a small plot of land so we can garden, have horses, and maybe some other kind of livestock. We will have 2 or 3 children, but this will happen after we spend a few years together, just the 2 of us. It was a great plan. This was our dream. Long story short, these 4 cold cases I solved brought me to the attention of Sheriff Jim Stevenson. I found myself sitting in his office listening to an amazing proposal. He wanted me to work with his investigative team. For all intents and purposes, I would be a detective. The downside was that I would have to report to his office, located in the center of the county. Instead of 11 miles commuting back and forth to work, I have to travel 27 miles. The upside was more money and my own patrol car to take home every night. I was also allowed to ride it to criminology classes. The clincher was that they said they would pay me for the time I spent in the class and pay my tuition. Needless to say, as much as I hated leaving all my colleagues and friends behind on the local police force, the sheriff made me an offer I couldn't refuse. The atmosphere in the district center could only be described as competitive. There was no doubt that my rapid rise had angered at least a few of my colleagues. I tried to keep a low profile, working harder than ever. Most of my time was spent researching unsolved cases. As before, I continued to work on these things at home. I usually read everything our office has available on a particular case, memorizing as much as possible. Then, when I had some time or when an idea occurred to me, I would enter it into my evidence app. At the end of the day, I would transfer my thoughts to a USB drive to take with me to work the next day. It was this routine that led to everything changing. It started on Wednesday morning when I couldn't find my flash drive. I looked everywhere. No flash drive. I was sure I had left it on my desk, but there was nothing there. And then it dawned on me. It was probably accidentally pushed off the table and fell into the trash can. The trash can was empty. Then I remembered that Stella had taken the white plastic bag of trash into the trash last night. She had already left for work, so I had to dig through the trash to find my missing flash drive. I began the painstaking work of parsing the packages. Finally, 3 rows deep, I found a white bag inside a black bag. What the heck? Why did she put one into the other? Why not just throw the bag on top? The good news is that my flash drive was there. The bad news is that there was more to it. That sunny Wednesday morning, that day of turning point, became one of the darkest days of my life. After I put the flash drive in my pocket, I noticed a clear sandwich bag underneath. In the sandwich bag, I found 6 small packets, better known as condoms. All of them were filled with an easily recognizable white substance. It didn't take a detective to realize that this was an important piece of evidence. A laboratory is not required to identify white matter. It doesn't take long for a trusting husband to realize that his marriage and life as he knows it is probably finished. I unlocked my squad car and placed the bag of condoms in the evidence cooler. Then I began to think about my next step. My first instinct was immediate confrontation, but Stella could have simply denied everything. She might say, for example, that the neighborhood boys were probably using our garbage can for nefarious purposes. I quickly determined that I would need to use a more reliable method. I need to use professional surveillance equipment located in my home. This will allow me to determine if this was a one-off or an ongoing affair. I wasn't even sure if novel was the right word. With 6 full condoms, would orgy be a better word? Installing the appropriate equipment will allow me to determine not only the situation, but possibly also the participants. I will be able to conduct DNA analysis of the contents of condoms if the need arises. I was making a list of things I would need to do when my phone rang. Assistant Sheriff Jake Robbins. It was the boss, Sheriff Stevenson, calling to tell me about a possible breakthrough in one of our cold cases. He told me that Luke found Alice, Reynolds' car on his property. Sheriff Stevenson asked me to get there as soon as possible. He stated that he was putting me in charge of this newly opened cold case that had suddenly become hot. This was the first time in the 2 years of my new job that I became the lead investigator on a case. I was honored that the boss chose me to handle such a complex and well-known case. As I headed to the ranch, my thoughts about condoms were replaced by memories of the day Luke called me out of the blue. He wanted to discuss the murder of Holly Sherman, which was another one of our unsolved cases. I made an appointment with him for later that day. This turned out to be very successful. He stunned me with his first sentence. He reported that he had engaged in a foursome with Holly Sherman at her home. I had to tread carefully. Sexual activity, no matter how depraved, is usually not a crime. I asked him if it was her consent. He said she was a willing participant at first, but became less active as events progressed. Having said this, he assured me that she never asked them to stop or even pause. Over time, she simply lost her enthusiasm. He went on to say that it bothered him so much that he finally confessed everything to his brother, who was a minister of the local church. His brother advised him to find me and tell me everything. I told him I appreciated the information, but nothing he admitted to was illegal, until she was forced to have sex against her will. That's when he told me that the other two members were Stephen Barber and Bill Raymore. Both Luke and Bill were there at Stephen's invitation. I thought it was a little strange that Stephen, who was supposed to be Holly's boyfriend, initiated such an act, but it wasn't a crime either. I needed to get to the bottom of the situation, so I asked Luke if he was involved in Holly's poisoning. He said he would never do that. I asked him if he suspected that other participants might have been involved in her murder. He stated that he had no reason to think so. At that moment, I decided that this was all just an attempt by Luke to clear his conscience and would not have much impact on our cold case. So, it was an interesting conversation, but it didn't help us understand Holly's murder yet. I interviewed Stephen, Holly's boyfriend, early on in the case and ruled him out. I also understood that although Luke felt bad about what happened, it didn't make him a suspect. All I had to check was another member, Bill Raymore. I made a mental note to check on it the next day. I spent a thorough check on Mr. Raymore. Other than some evidence that he wasn't a good guy, there was nothing to convict him of murder. So I started checking on his wife, Ellie Raymore, and found a clue. Before they moved here a year ago, she worked for a chemical company on the Gulf Coast. After several phone conversations with managers and supervisors at the plant where she worked, I had a suspect. She had access to the very chemical that the medical examiner determined to be the cause of Holly's death. Managers at the chemical plant said that while they kept a close eye on products that could be used recreationally, they weren't as concerned about toxic byproducts as the one I asked about. Just 3 days after my visit with Luke, I was part of the team sent to retrieve Ellie Raymore. We came prepared with a search warrant for her home. She met us at the door when I showed my badge and told her that we were accusing her of killing Holly Sherman. She surprised us all. "I was wondering when you idiots would realize this," she grinned. "Just let me say this, that smug bitch deserved what she got." So, thanks to my visit to Luke Young, we unfrozen the case. Most of the credit went to me, but it really belonged to Luke. Now I'm getting ready to talk to Luke again. This is about another unsolved case. This is probably the most talked about case we've ever had. The thing is that an elderly woman named Alice Reynolds and a young man named Jerry Gibson disappeared on the same evening. She was his teacher in a special program designed to teach mentally retarded young men how to cope with the responsibilities of being the man of the house. Her teaching took place in the residence she shared with her husband, Alan. At that time, there were many rumors that a student and his teacher disappeared on the same day. Did they have a romantic relationship? Did they go somewhere to be together, or was it just a super weird coincidence? These questions were never answered, and the case was soon closed. Today may mark a new start in solving this mystery. Wouldn't it be great if Luke could contribute to this cause like he did with Holly Sherman? If so, we should consider placing him on staff. As I drove up to Luke's house, the forensics cars pulled up from the other direction. Luke came out to meet us. As we shook hands, the leader of the forensic team asked if it was easy to get to the car. Luke told them where it was hidden. Hidden in plain sight. He reminded us that the multi-car dealership he now ran had been in the family for many years. Until the recent expansion, it was a Ford agency. Over the years, they have exchanged many cars. They sold some of their used cars and sent some to auction, but many of them ended up in a car graveyard in the middle of their ranch. Quite often, collectors came out to look at these cars. It was one of those collectors who spotted a nearly new car that was among all these classic cars. He asked how much they were asking for this 2-year-old white Buick. Luke went to take a look. The doors were locked, but the license plates were still there. He quickly called, asked a question, and was defeated. He made more than one call to the sheriff. After listening to Luke's story, we followed him to the car. 10 minutes after we got to the car, forensic scientists opened the doors and trunk. They found a couple of empty drink cups and holders, but there appeared to be little evidence in the car. There was no blood or other significant findings. The most important thing is that there were no bodies there. I asked Luke to think of a place on the ranch where we could hide the bodies. He searched his memory for a couple of minutes. Then his eyes lit up as he remembered that there was an old hand-dug well nearby. Forensic scientists soon determined that the water in the well was at least 12 feet deep. They hung the camera in the well. The operator studied the picture through an optical sight. After a few minutes of analysis, he turned to us and said, "We have 2 bodies there." I immediately called my boss with the news. He congratulated us and said he would make some calls. He needed to assemble a team to retrieve the bodies. Hopefully they will be there by tomorrow. He told me to report to the ranch tomorrow at dawn. The team will report to me as soon as they arrive. I thanked him for trusting me. Crime scene tape was wrapped around the well and the car before we drove home. I was looking forward to a very busy day tomorrow, but soon my thoughts returned to the 6 condoms. Since my duties for the day were completed, I had 2 extra hours to go shopping. On the way home, I stopped at an electronics store. I purchased 4 smoke detectors equipped with audio-video. They looked exactly like the ones installed in our house. I also had a base station to record readings from these devices. I arrived home more than an hour before Stella was due to return, and all the devices were already in place when she arrived. I'll soon find out the answer to the riddle of the 6 condoms. It could be nothing, or it could be the end of my marriage. When Stella returned home, I covered up my concerns about condoms by explaining that I had been assigned as lead detective on a newly opened case in which a teacher and her student. Stella seemed very interested in everything that happened at the ranch. I watched her carefully all evening, but did not see anything unusual in her behavior. She was relaxed, happy, and loving. She showed no signs of guilt or remorse. That evening, I spent several hours refreshing my memory about the case of Alice and Jerry. I always suspected that they had a sexual relationship. When I was reading the case file, I found a note from a school administrator that mentioned that Jerry had asked Alice to help him with issues related to dating girls. I immediately realized that he had led her into dangerous territory. After I digested every piece of evidence in the file, I came to the conclusion that Alice had finally realized that she was in too deep with Jerry. He turned the teacher-student relationship into a sexual relationship. This became a danger to her entire family if it ever became known. She knew what she had to do, and she did it. When it was time to go to bed, I was determined to make love to Stella. I needed to see how she would react to me. It turned out that she didn't like it very much. Her thoughts seemed to be elsewhere. I'm sure she was faking her orgasm. She made the right sounds and said the right words, but her body spoke differently. The slight pressure on me that I usually felt when she orgasmed was missing. In addition, Her breathing did not follow the usual rhythm during orgasm. Her actions confirmed my suspicions. But now there were hidden devices that would tell the whole story. Now that I think about it, her ardor seemed to be decreasing over the course of a month or so. Until now, I didn't attach much importance to this. These condoms put me on high alert. I decided to make this a double night. We haven't gone there twice lately, but I wanted to see if she would turn me down. She didn't, but her participation in that second event was even more lackluster than her first performance. Usually we enjoyed at least 15 minutes of afterglow, but this time, after I shot my pack a second time, I simply walked out, jumped out of bed, and headed to the bathroom. Returning to bed, I turned my back to her. She reached out to me, but I didn't answer. I spent Thursday watching the assembled team collect the bodies, which they took to the lab to complete the identification process. I spoke to the forensics team at length, and they were convinced it was a murder-suicide situation. We discussed this and all other aspects of the matter. It's finally over. I got home about an hour late that evening because I had a few reports to file and a pre-press briefing to attend. The boss gave me the day off as a reward for solving the case. When I got home that evening, I explained to Stella what I had been doing all day, but I didn't tell her about the extra day off. I intended to take it tomorrow and use it to work on solving a case that was happening in my own home. When it was time to go to bed, I tried to pick up where we left off the night before. To my surprise, Stella asked for time off, saying that she was not in the mood. This made my head spin wheels. Was she not in the mood because she was already satiated after another orgy this morning? Will I find another package of condoms? The next morning after Stella left, I made one trip to the trash can. This time, not a single condom. Then I began to look at what happened in our house yesterday, that is, on Thursday. There was a short recording made by a device in the living room and a longer one made by a similar device in the guest bedroom. I sat down and watched my marriage fall apart. The video started out showing the living room. The first thing that sparked interest was when Stella opened the door a little after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She let a couple of guys in, kissing them as they entered. I was able to identify the guys immediately. They visited us in the summer. Then she introduced them to me, and we spent some time in relaxed conversation. Later, she took them for a swim in our pool. During my arrest that week, I received several cuts on my arms and chest, and some of the wounds were bandaged. I didn't want to get the bandages wet or risk getting an infection, so I stayed inside and watched some sports on TV. I didn't attach much importance to them, and, of course, I didn't suspect any tricks. After all, these two guys were her cousins. Returning to the living room, only a few minutes of conversation had passed when I heard them reminiscing about his swimming in our pool, the very thing I was remembering. Stella remembered that they had carefully hidden themselves in that part of the pool that was not visible from the windows. I had a hard time focusing on this episode. Has this just started at our pool, or have they done this before? Were they dating when Stella and I were married? Something just doesn't fit in my head. Not that it matters. They are 3 consenting adults, except that my wife was one of them. Their conversations revealed some additional information of interest. The cousins attended a state university about 50 miles away. After I heard them mention it, I remembered how they talked about it when they were here. Neither of them had classes on Tuesday or Thursday during the day. This explained several things. First of all, I now understand why Stella suddenly changed her work schedule this fall. She used to work 4 10-o'clock days from Monday to Thursday. She switched to 13-o'clock days that fell on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Then there were 2 2-hour days that fell on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She said that the changes were introduced by management, but I suspect that it was all done by her request. She was home by noon on those days her cousins visited. That explained a lot. I thought the conversation in the living room was bad until I saw what happened in the guest bedroom. I'm not sure orgy is a strong enough word to describe what I saw. First, they helped each other undress. They then began intense foreplay on the bed. One of them pulled out a handful of condoms. I was surprised when Stella said, "Today, I have good news for you guys. I've been taking the pills for 10 days now. I'm sure we will all enjoy it." One of the cousins remarked that he thought she was trying to have children. She said, "Jake and I are officially trying to get me pregnant, but I've put it off for obvious reasons." Is Jake okay with this? How can he be against it if he doesn't know? He would be furious if he found out I was taking pills. If he found out, it would lead to some questions that I'm not prepared to answer. I don't think I could live without what the three of us do. But I also don't want to lose Jake and my marriage. Thus, what he does not know will not harm him. She continued to bemoan the fact that I seemed to notice a difference in her behavior. She mentioned that the last time we had sex, when we finished, I just headed straight to the bathroom. The time we used to spend in the afterglow of love has disappeared. She admitted that she enjoyed the afterglow as much as the sex. She missed this. She further mentioned that she avoided marital sex on Tuesdays and Thursdays, claiming that she was not in the mood. It was true. First of all, she was already completely full, but she also didn't want to risk me noticing something that she somehow couldn't hide. She admitted that I was clearly upset by her refusals. She never turned me down before she started going on these cousin dates. She then mentioned that I haven't even tried to initiate anything lately. She said it bothered her. There was a lot of sexual activity in this video. They did everything you can imagine. I am far from being an expert in this act, so I cannot give a name to these variations. When it was all over, there was nothing but ecstasy on her face. This disgusted me. There was very little conversation when they seriously had sex. Of course, sex for them is adultery for me. You would have thought that watching these numerous videos would be the main event that led to the end of my marriage, and it certainly played a big role. But it was the conversation that followed that ultimately sealed the fate of my marriage. Some of the things she said were the nails in the coffin. After watching the video, I called a divorce lawyer. I was able to get an appointment on Monday afternoon. All weekend, I avoided Stella in every possible way. She made several attempts to interest me sexually, but I did not give in. There were no kisses, no hugs, no private conversations. I'm done trying to save a failing marriage. Finally, she decided to take the bull by the horns. She spoke these 5 ominous words. "Honey, we need to talk." I was ready. She started by saying she knew something was wrong. I never kissed her again, let alone had sex with her.